So let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit about, your ideas around how we can shift this and also intermittent reinforcement, what's hooking us. How do we do something different?
Yeah. So the first thing, well, it's all about awareness. So the bottom line is, if people don't remember anything else from this podcast, just remember awareness. Awareness must be present to win, as the saying goes. So if we don't know that we're feeling worse because of this, right, just might be feeling down, and we're not making the connection between that and the endless scroll on our phone. You know, we have to see that. We have to see it very clearly. And so it starts with really, just seeing, like, what are we getting from whatever we're being distracted by. And we can let's go right to the heart of it. There's so many people that are really they really believe that multitasking is okay and is the way to go. And they want to believe the myth. It's kind of like this myth of willpower. It's like, oh, if I just had more willpower, I'd be able to do all these things that I can't do. Willpower is definitely more myth than muscle. I write a lot about that in my Unwinding Anxiety book. If you could just think yourself out of anxiety, that'd be great. I would gladly find another job. But that's not how our brains work. And so, with whether it's multitasking or scrolling on our news feed or on our social media feed or whatever, really paying attention and seeing what we're getting from it. When I try to multitask, it's really important for me to see very clearly how, one, whatever I was supposed to be paying attention to, let's say I'm on a meeting on Zoom, then I'm checking my email at the same time. I miss out on the meeting. I feel less connected. I feel like, oh no, did I miss something? And if I say something, will they know that I was multitasking? And that's just exhausting, where and checking my emails doesn't really get me farther along. I could easily, if they're emails that I'm just going to delete, I could do that in 5 seconds after the meeting. And if it's an email that I need to respond to, I need to devote full attention to that so that I am efficient and effective in whatever that response is. So I'm neither efficient or effective on the meeting, nor am I with whatever I'm multitasking with. And it's really important to see, what am I getting from this? Oh, this is actually making things worse. I feel exhausted after multitasking. So really paying attention is critical for breaking out of these habits of distraction. And seeing all the ways that we can get distracted is a good place to be able to start to be able to step out of them. Oh, as an example, I had a resident physician that was training with me, and she described how she had two small kids, and she literally woke up from a daydream, or from a daze, more like it, when her kids were sitting at the dining room table eating dinner, and she was standing away from the table checking her news feed. And she woke up to this daze because it was automatic. She's like, what am I doing? I'm not spending time with my kids. I like eating dinner with my kids. And she was just she'd gotten so caught up in the news cycle that she didn't even notice that she was doing it. So we've got to notice, and then we've got to notice what we're getting from it. So she, for example, noticed that this was the last moment that, or the last thing she wanted to do was to be spending time checking her news feed when she didn't really need to, because she'd probably checked it 10 minutes before. And she wanted to spend time with her kids. Kids grow fast. So seeing how unrewarding whatever the distraction is that we're doing is really the key to breaking that as a habit. And I go way into detail about why that's the case, back to the 70s, and probably in the Unwinding Anxiety books, the easiest place if somebody wants to get into the details. But basically, there's a huge amount of neuroscience showing that the only way to break a habit is to see how unrewarding it is, right? We become disenchanted. And then the next step is to really see, well, what's it like when I think of it as unitasking, what happens when we just truly pay attention when we're on the meeting and we notice boredom or we notice restlessness and we get curious about that? In those moments, we do two things. One is we stay present in the meeting, and two, we can see the habitual processes of our mind and notice that we don't have to act on them. It's kind of like this, let's say we have poison ivy and we have this urge to scratch it. And if we notice the urge and we get curious about what itching feels like, that curiosity itself can be a balm that helps us not automatically scratch. And we know, oh, if I don't scratch, it'll go away faster. And it will go away. The itching always goes away, even if we do scratch, but much faster if we don't. So here, we can bring awareness and notice what's better than scratching that itch of checking social media or, being just doing the distraction thing. And I have to say, when I am immersed in something that I'm doing, there are a few things that feel better, And so when we really notice that, like, well, what's it like when I put away all my distractions? Boy, it feels really good to just immerse myself in what I'm doing. And what that highlights is it's not about getting rid of distractions. It's really about seeing how our mind works so that we can effectively work with it, so that we can be so skilled at this and see how much better it feels to notice the distractions and not scratch that itch, so we can have our phone right next to us and notice it bang or ping. I mean, ideally, I certainly wouldn't recommend people having all their alerts on. That's just not necessary. No email is that important. If it's really important, they'd probably call us. But we can have these things, our weapons of mass distraction, right next to us and have them no longer be weaponized against us.
So Anna Lemke, who's an addiction psychiatrist at Stanford, you're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
her. I had a
Yes.
conversation with her, and what she talks about is two things. One is the sort of the detox, and then the second is the self-binding. So detox is actually just quitting. Like, I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
to allow myself to be on Instagram at all, or I'm going to not have email on my phone. I'm only going to have it, on my computer, or do it at certain times of the day. And I think there's actually a benefit to that, of doing some detox of some things so that you can start to pay attention to your mind. I mean, that's what basic meditation
Mm-hmm.
is you're sitting with your mind without other distractions to see how your mind works. And then the self-binding aspect of it is actually helping yourself out environmentally so that you don't have those bings and pings and, all of that. But ultimately, we do live in a world of mass distraction. And so
Mm-hmm.
we need to be able to learn how to operate in the world, notice when our attention is getting pulled away, or notice that urge to check, and then redirect our attention back. And I do think that's a skill that we can develop over time, as you're talking about. But maybe in the beginning, it's helpful to do things like, when you get home from work, plug your phone in and you're, in another room, and then have dinner with your kids. Don't have the phone on the counter, where you're
Yeah.
just going to be in that automatic patterning to be able to break some of this patterning up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good progression, and for some people, they've just got to detox. That's the only way to start to get a handle on it. And even if they can't detox, they can still learn. I think we all can learn. If we're like, oh, I'm in the middle of scrolling again, we can pause and ask ourselves, what am I getting from this? So that we start to build that disenchantment. The self-binding piece, I think, can also be a helpful middle step. But as you're pointing out, we can't drop ourselves onto a desert island and suddenly not have any more email, because we'd probably get fired from our jobs, or whatever, if we have to email as part of our jobs, as most of us do. So I think having the full spectrum and being able to follow, that, like, how do I start detox for a bit, even if I can't detox, explore, map this out. What am I getting from this? So we build the disenchantment, and then eventually start to learn what freedom tastes like. you know, oh, this is what it's like when my phone doesn't have control over me. What does that feel like? This is what it's like when I'm fully present in a conversation. This is what it's like when I'm fully present with my family. It's like, there are a few things that are more rewarding than that.
And you're really pointing to the reinforcement being from the inside
Hmm.
there. So the feeling it in your body, staying with it, lingering on, this is what it feels like when I'm engaging in the way that I want to be engaging with the world. And that's what will help us do that behavior again, repeatedly over and over again.
I
How do
was
you
just going to
manage?
say,
Yeah.
I'm glad you're highlighting that because external reinforcers, we become habituated to them. So
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
we need more and more and more. With internal things like connection or kindness, they only get stronger the more we practice them because they feel so good. So I just want to highlight they're totally different. And one builds in a negative way where it gets us sucked in more and more because it's external and we become habituated. And the other builds in a positive way where we only see how wonderful it feels to be connected. And so we connect even more.
One of the things I started doing during COVID was taking this African dance class. My
Mm,
girlfriend's an African dance teacher, and she teaches down at the beach in Santa Barbara.
mm.
And on Sunday mornings, and I'll tell you, pretty much every Sunday, I'm like, "Oh, I've got too much to do." Sundays are my day to, like, catch up from from the week, but I go, and part of what makes me go is that internal that reinforcement of knowing what I'm gonna feel like when I'm there and what I'm gonna feel like after, and actually, I come back and I'm way more productive because I've done this thing. But, I think about that for you because you've talked about being a surfer, which is such a good example. You can't really have your phone when you're surfing. You can't be working when you're surfing. And
No.
it's such and you have to be so in the moment. And I'm wondering if that influences your work, like having these times, these breaks when we're totally immersed in something that's not related to work. Sometimes it can help our work.
Oh, absolutely. So I have to say my lab, they can kind of tell, when I've gone surfing before work, because I come into the office and they're like, have you been surfing? It's probably that huge grin on my face that totally gives it away every time. It's a great way to start the day. And like you're pointing out, it's a very physical meditation where you must be present to catch the wave because otherwise you'll miss it or it'll come and clobber you on the head. So there are real consequences to not being present. And there's something about connecting with nature that also is just really spiritually, boy, it just kind of fills my tank, so to speak. And so that, and also, it's amazing just to not, because our thinking brain isn't nearly as good as the rest of our brain at doing things. And so if I'm struggling with a scientific question or a way to write a grant proposal or a paper, it can be really helpful to take a break and go surfing and let all of that stuff organize itself in my head subconsciously. And then I come back and it's just like, there it is.
Yeah, I think Cal Newport talks about that in terms of this
Mm.
sort of productive meditation where you go for a run and your kind of mind is working on it, but you're not in that focused state of working on it. It's much more so it's actually more default mode network. Is that right? That you when you're in that mind wandering state, is that what's
Well,
happening?
I think so. The default mode network certainly is activated when our mind is wandering. Yet, some of the research that my lab and other labs have suggested is that network may be, at least one part of it, like the posterior cingulate cortex, may be activated when we're caught up in our experience.
Mm,
And so I think you can differentiate mind wandering and awareness of mind wandering versus mind wandering and being caught up in the mind wandering. And when there's mind wandering and being caught up, that's the default mode network. And that's what we default to when we're not trained to pay
mm,
attention to our minds, which is why, in most studies, when you look at mind wandering and default mode network activity, there's activity when we're mind wandering because we're caught up in it, whether it's daydreaming or whatever. Yet our mind can be wandering, like you're pointing out, and we can be aware of it, which is important because one, we can notice when there's a tendency to think, oh, there's the world's greatest idea, and then we get caught up in it and we miss looking at it objectively. And two, sometimes when we're so caught up in one idea, we can't have the space for other ideas to come up. And ideally, it's about really being open to all possibilities, being creative, exploring, what all possibilities are. that's when we're most likely to find the best solution to a problem, for example.
So it's really that distinction between creativity versus rumination. And they're one's
Mm,
sort of more of an open-minded creative state, and the other is more kind of just going around and around on the sort of more closed-minded topic
that's a great way of
and
putting it, that
self-referencing.
distinction.
Okay. So certainly surfing, dancing, being outside, all those things I think foster the first kind, the creative mind wandering state. It gives your mind a little bit of a break in a different way than trying to give your mind a break by like just going to all different types of apps on your phone or you know.
Mhm.
Um, so just sort of closing up this segment, what are some takeaways you want folks to have around this age of distraction?
I think takeaway number one would be just notice how often, how much, and how we're distracted. Like, what is it that pulls our attention away? Is it something that was designed to catch our attention on social media? Is it something where we've trained ourselves or we've gotten in the habit of when we're bored to go to some distraction because the boredom is uncomfortable and it triggers that? It's really hard. I think a lot of folks have just not learned distress tolerance because, or have unlearned it even because we have these weapons of mass distraction. So when we're, you know, we're sitting at a stoplight, and suddenly, if it's at night, you can look around and you see everybody's crotch glowing blue because it's like they can't just sit for 30 seconds while a red light is red. They've got to be checking their phones. So just noticing, what it is that triggers us. And then the other takeaway would be just noticing how how it feels when we're sucked into a distraction so that we can become disenchanted with it. And then I guess the third thing would be noticing. Again, it comes back to awareness, noticing what it feels like to just fully be present in a conversation with somebody, for example, or working on a task, or just going for a walk. Like, what's it like to just leave our phone at home and just go for a walk?
Hmm.
Even if we don't have to be in nature, it could just be, if we live in an urban setting, just walking and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood.
Or just leave your phone at home and go to the grocery store. What's gonna
Yes.
what's gonna go wrong when you're at the grocery store without your phone? You'll survive. But
Yeah.
it is kind of getting past that. There's a yoga teacher, Michael Stone, that I study who talks about impatience, and he talks about how impatience is our inability to be with our body and let it,
Mm,
just sort of be with ourselves in our bodies, right? And the
yes.
greater that we have the ability to be with our bodies, the more patient we become. And it is a skill that we've lost because it's so quickly that we can escape our bodies or escape the moment, but it is a skill we can begin to cultivate. And there may be a little bit of discomfort, especially as you're moving into a state of flow. If you are getting into a state of flow, sometimes there's that little bit of like, oh, this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah,
And then I can feel the flow state, which is a wonderful state to be in.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, Dr. Jed, I will see you again next month. We'll all see you again next month. Thank you so much for taking your time with us today.
My pleasure.